joining us again here in the Great Hall. We're really excited to kick off our next to last session of the day, focused on local resilience that starts with citizen leaders. I'd like to invite David Eisner up to the stage to give some remarks on the critical role that citizens leaders have in resilience and to lead a discussion on what citizen-led solutions can look like. David has had a distinguished career in public service, serving as the CEO of the Corporation of National and Community Service, AmeriCorps, as well as the former CEO of the National Constitution Center. Today, David co-chairs the Southeast Pennsylvania chapter of Braver Angels, and we really appreciate Braver Angels' collaboration with the National Conference on Citizenship to present this session to you today and their ongoing partnership. So thank you, David.
Cameron, thank you. I'm so delighted to be here and seeing so many familiar faces and a lot of new faces. I need to share, so I'm going to share a couple of opening thoughts, and I thought that the best way to make sure I was going to be fast was to actually invite our panel up here first. So we have Vinay Arakandi, who is a leader at a leading volunteer at Braver Angels, and he is a founder of Better Together America. Jillian Youngblood is the executive director at Civic Genius and also the director of Dialogue?
Deliberative Democracy.
Deliberative Democracy at the National Civic League. And Valerie Lemmy has more titles than I can name at once. I'll note that
been around a long time.
Among them, on the board of NCOC, on the Ohio State Commission for Civil Rights. And I'm really looking forward to our discussion, which I'm going to try to tee up now. You know, together with a lot of other volunteers at Braver Angels, a couple of whom are here in this room. Steve, it's time to wave. And we have developed a program that equips citizens to solve local problems together across our polarized divides. We'll hear more about that in a moment. I need to share, though, I'm not going to be the first today. I doubt I'll be the last to note that this is a very difficult time, to say the least. I think it's safe to say that today is very different than last Tuesday was. And it's more than just the horrific violence of the assassination, and it's even more than the painful polarization that we've all experienced, both before but with really deep intensity since. It's this feeling of being trapped, stuck, kind of not knowing what steps to take. In a lot of ways, that makes us, as civic professionals, feel a little bit like the citizens that we're engaging with every day. We find citizens feel alienated and mostly like they feel like they don't matter, and the people that are supposed to be making decisions on their behalf don't care, and that whatever they do isn't going to accomplish anything. So over the next hour, with the help from friends, we're going to look hard at the role that citizens themselves can play in dislodging us from this stuck point and in pushing back against what almost feels dystopian. We're going to explore how citizens can say, no, we're in charge here, and we can make our communities and our nation what we want them to be. And we're going to wrestle with a connected question, which is, what do we, as civic professionals in America, what is our job in equipping citizens to be able to take this leadership on themselves? And when we conclude this, we'll have an opportunity to hear from Mari Giles, the newly appointed CEO at Braver Angels. So I know that most of you are asking, after we figure out the role of citizens and the role of us, what are we going to do with the rest of the hour? But to get kicked off, let me share the outlines of this program, Citizen-Led Solutions. What we're going to focus on is we're going to focus on a township to begin with in California. It's called El Sobrante, and it's just north of Oakland. And it's struggling with the problem. It's got a teeming homeless encampment in their hillsides. And this has become toxic. The citizens have been clashing about this for years. There's one group talking about zero tolerance. We need to take action and simply not allow anything. There's another group advocating for treatment and counseling. And there's yet another group that's advocating that people leave and don't come back. And recently, some members of Braver Angels that were there started looking through some of the work that they'd done to figure out how to speak across some of these divides. And they decided to look for some solutions. And they had this, they took a 3-hour depolarization experience. We call it a red-blue workshop, and became a catalyst to develop that solution. They came up with several town halls. They brought real diversities from among these groups that have different positions together. And they began to look at what are the various options. And one option that floated up led them to visit a community in Austin, Texas, called the Community First Tiny Home Community. They came away from that inspired, and it gave them a vision for what a solution could look like. That solution was what we would call a common ground solution, because all the factions in the community that were fighting in different ways for this came together believing that this was the right way forward. And they're currently in very positive negotiations with a site and with the developer. So we know that the journey's not complete, but the civic action there, led by citizens, is one of the most important things that's happened in that community. And I need to tell you, right now, El Sobrante is one of about 10 projects in various forms of completion that we're thinking of as demonstration projects for citizen-led solutions. And all of them offer the same strong blend of citizens leading, finding common ground solutions that can bring these factions together, and then moving toward implementing those solutions in the community. The real power of community, I'm going to start saying CLS for community-led solutions. The real power of CLS is that it flips the script. There's no waiting for politicians, institutions, experts to fix what's broken. Instead, the tools are handed directly to the citizens. And CLS generally works in 3 steps, which we think of as foster relationships, forge common ground, and follow through on implementation. You think of people coming together across divides to foster relationships. They build understanding and trust for each other. They begin to understand what each other cares about. And if they haven't already come into the discussion knowing what issue they want to solve, at this point where they're getting to know each other, they figure out what issue they want to tackle. Then, after they figured out their issue, then they focus on forging a common consensus, which requires deep work, understanding the issue, and continuing to build the diversity of the group, because the more they understand the issue, the more they need to bring folks in from other parts of the community to support solution finding. And then finally, once they develop a common ground solution, they move toward implementation, which again may mean diversifying the group so that they have the right skills and contacts into the rest of the community to implement it. Why does this matter beyond just the particular fix? Well, we see 4 things happening as a result of citizen-led solutions. We see relationships changing. Neighbors, people who have thought of themselves as on opposite sides of conflicts find themselves on the same side of the table. This is something that Braver Angels has gotten really good at over the last 10 years. We also see civic muscle growing. We've heard actually a lot today about civic muscle. But when people discover that they have agency, when they begin to see that they can work together, when they experience success, that makes people want to do more. We see problems getting solved, of course, and we see an expansion of what is called the civic commons, this idea that there are places and venues where citizens of that community can come together, work together, and improve their community. And the fact is, democracy has never been sustained by institutions. It's always been dependent on citizens seeing themselves as the agents of democracy, not just its consumers. Now, I've already introduced our terrific panel, and I'm going to head over to a seat and begin. Welcome.
Thank you.
So we are in this historic moment, and I'm just amazed at how this polarization, which has been such a big problem for America for so long, has just become so intense. The level of vitriol that we've seen over the last 5 days is extraordinary. And it's made me think a bunch about citizen-led solutions and the potential role that it can play in some of our resilience. Have any of you connected the dots that way, thought about how this idea of citizen-led solutions matters in relation to the kind of space we're in now?
Yeah.
Vinay.
Thank
And feel free to spend a minute with a better introduction, also sharing what Better Together America is up to.
Sure. Thanks so much, David. Appreciate it. So let me actually start by answering your question, using that as a way
Sure.
to talk about what Better Together America does. So the first thing you're probably thinking is, where's this accent from? I'm from Australia originally, but this is the first national conference on citizenship where I am a US citizen.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. And so what I can say is that this, from overseas, is this polarization is happening around the world as well. And that's something that's often missed. And in trying to understand what's causing it, like, we should look at that. And what's our theory is, at least, is that a sort of a hyper-individualistic mindset has been driven across the world for a very long time. What we're experiencing is the tail end of a long process. And so what polarization is actually people trying to find group identity again, right? It's a sort of a scrambling to find a sense of meaning and in this moment, right? So it's in response to a need that's occurring, and they're just clashing with each other. So the question is how do you meet that desire for groupness? How do you meet that desire for connection in a healthier way, right? And that's what, obviously the big theme of today has been building community, especially at a local level. And so at Better Together America, that's what we're trying to do, not by starting from scratch, because there's many, many organizations, and for those of you who know about the map, there's at least 11,000 organizations out there already working on this. So if we want to build community on a local level at scale, right, we need to gather together into a shared movement people who are already doing that. So 11,000 organizations, that's millions of active people right? Imagine if we were acting as a coordinated movement, coordinated locally and interconnected as nodes across the country. So what Better Together America is trying to do is do that connection, right? Starting with just building relationships. And we call these things civic hubs, a term you've also heard today. And we're not the only ones using it. So if we can begin just by connecting as these movements, and then we can start to scale our individual activities, whether it be bridging or problem solving or service, right? So that's how we're trying to go about doing that.
Thank you. Jillian.
Yeah, something of the many things that are worrying me now and over the last few days, one of them has been, I'm worried about kind of overstating support for, overstating the extent of political division in this country and overstating support for political violence. So if you look at the research on political violence, indeed stated support for political violence has increased over the last few years. But if you drill into that, and you ask people really specific questions, like, do you mean this elected official, you're gonna go to their house like with this kind of weapon? Basically, when you get very specific, people in those surveys are like, no, I just mean like we should throw the bums out, like this whole thing's a mess. That's very different from actually supporting and aiding and abetting political violence. And I think that this narrative is kind of emerging around that, and it's a narrative that we have seen for the last few years. Kind of, as Vinay says, around the world and certainly in the US, that we are so divided that we cannot possibly come together to find solutions on all of these many issues, when in fact we know that Americans across political lines have all kinds of common ground on all kinds of issues, and they're already doing all kinds of things in their communities to tackle those, but we don't necessarily have a name for it or an identity for it that people feel like they can plug into. So I see what has happened over the last few days to really escalate this conversation that we've been having for years now.
And I would certainly agree with my colleagues, but I think about this more from a historic perspective. The Founding Fathers' ideals of what citizenship looked like was very different from its practice. And there have been periods in our history when we struggle with the ideal and the reality. How inclusive, what does it mean, what does it look like, who should be a part of this? And we are at a period now where we're struggling. What does inclusive mean? Who should be included? And how do we deal with the fact that there's some groups that have never been a part of the fabric of our democracy, and others have only had rights, like people of color, African Americans, since 1964 and 65. And so we struggle with what does that mean. And at the Kettering Foundation, where I work, we've been thinking about this issue of citizenship and democracy for over 40 years. Partially we recognize that everyday people don't go around saying, I'm a citizen. They might say I'm an American, they might say I'm a Daytonian, but they're certainly not seeing themselves as citizens. And when we think about, if they did think of themselves as citizens, what they learned in their civic class in elementary school or high school was that a good citizen is what? A voter, follows the law. So they think of citizenship as an institutional response or reaction. And so the challenge is, one, to help people understand that when professionals use citizenship, what we really are talking about is the work that everyday people must do in order for their communities to thrive, for their children to want to stay there, for their grandchildren to be raised there, and to find not only the common ground, but to recognize the tensions that exist among the various groups that live in a particular community, the trade-offs that they must make if they are going to be able to live together successfully, and find that common ground. And then the key, and I think what much of our work at the Kettering Foundation is, and maybe yours as well, is to exercise public judgment. To do more than just name and frame problems and frustrations and issues, but to act together to address the problems, to learn as a community how to begin to work together on those big, wicked problems, those unique problems to a particular community or a particular city that institutions can't fix by themselves and individuals can't fix by themselves. The entire community is required if it's going to be addressed. I live in a community where youth violence has just been the topic for the past year. We've had shootings in libraries, at bus stops, and everybody is in agreement that we've got to do something. Politicians don't have a lock on the answers. Everyday people don't have a lock on the answers. But coming together to talk about and deliberate and find common ground, and importantly, what are the community resources that are already there? Now, we tend to forget as professionals that everyday people solve problems all day long that don't ever arise to our attention. And how do they do that? Much of that, as John McKnight would have said, is associational life. They have groups and organizations that work in their churches and their schools to help address problems. And I think what you're talking about, what we certainly look to at the Kettering Foundation, is what are ways in this particular time where we're struggling with who is a citizen, what does that mean, what should it look like, and how can we find the space to talk about it in respectful, thoughtful, meaningful ways that we can all learn from. And so hopefully in your communities, small, large, you find those spaces where people feel comfortable talking about the issues that matter to them. And I have found globally, usually children are at the top of that list. And when you find something that people care about, that matters to them, I come to this work as a former city manager, and people don't really care that much about the operations of City Hall. But you talk to them about what's happening to their kids on the street corner, their safety, they are at the table. So it has to be things that people care about.
Valerie, you spoke just now of so compellingly about this idea of kind of citizenship as shrunken down to voting and following the law. Is it in anybody's interest? Are people making that happen?
Well, certainly I would say, again, I mentioned I was a city manager. Well, reform government brought in the council manager form that said professionals would run day-to-day operations of city government. Politicians run on the platform of I will fix it, vote for me. And so I think we have disinvited people from the agora, from the public square. And now we're saying we need to bring them back because we need them. But we have not worked with them in so long that they've forgotten kind of what the skills were that citizens need every day. And we've forgotten how to work with people and, as importantly, to share power, because it is about power sharing, it's about mutual respect, and a recognition that no matter where we might sit in our community, you could be the most wealthy business person or you could be a homeless person on the street. We have lived experiences, we have knowledge that requires us all to chat about what do we do about the problems that we face.
Thank you.
Can I just add on to that, David?
Please.
I appreciate that so much. I was talking to a friend about this the other day. So I feel very fortunate in my day job to be able to do democracy and civic health work and, have ostensibly skills from education and experience that hopefully enable me to do a good job at it. I'm also a Girl Scout troop leader to a bunch of second graders. And I have to do things like explain to Rachel's mom that she's going to get kicked out of the Girl Scouts if she cannot stay with us at the aquarium. This is the last time we're having this conversation. And I have to argue with Janice at the school to see if we can get the gym on Tuesday. Okay, we can't have it on Tuesday. What if we did this? And nobody compliments me on managing fragile relationships in a resource-constrained environment. But those are skills that a bunch of Girl Scout troop leaders have that nobody recognizes as civic infrastructure, and a bunch of skills that could absolutely help you manage, a homelessness issue in a community or solve some other kind of problem. And I think you talked about being kind of disinvited from these spaces because we think about them in terms of what are actually pretty unfriendly environments. And we tell people that they're doing it wrong all the time. So you should go to your city council town hall, right? Have you been to one of those lately? It's exasperating for a bunch of reasons that I probably don't need to lecture you on. It is true that my husband is not in the Elks Club. He does spend a lot more time with his kids than his grandfather did. So I think we really need to talk a lot more about expanding these definitions and formally recognizing the skills that people have that are transferable to everything we're talking about here.
I'll
Go ahead.
just jump in, add. If we think about it, yes, the idea that citizenship or civics equals voting, as someone who's a former political organizer, it is quite an extractive process, right? I want your vote, I want your money, I want you to volunteer. right? And I remember even looking at the apps and saying, which of these things am we, am I going to get from this person, right? So, but that's all you want. And maybe someone who's more engaged might do advocacy. And what is advocacy? It's about influencing that decision maker over there, right? So you're not the citizen isn't the decision maker in an institutional definition of democracy. Someone else is. And I think that's the fundamental problem we're facing is disempowerment, right? And when people are disempowered, right, that gives rise to some of the despair that we're seeing that allows for polarization, right? I have no power, therefore I must act in extreme ways.
And if I don't think I have power, then I'm not going to participate. I'm not going to show up. And too many of our young people feel as though the American dream is not real for them. So somehow we have failed in that aspect of dreaming about what is possible. And we need to be able to ratchet back a little bit and help them recognize that, in fact, they have more power than they may appreciate. So my vote doesn't count is what we hear in our work a lot. Well, maybe your vote doesn't count. I live in Ohio, in a gerrymandered state where 86% of the voting is gerrymandered for one party. It may not count at the congressional level, depending on where you sit, but it'll certainly count at the local school board election. It will certainly count at the local mayor and city commission level. And so helping people recognize that government is complicated, there are lots of elements, but if you start at the smallest space in your neighborhood, you can have a huge impact on what is going on. And then when you organize with other people who share the ideas, your impact is increased. And so we've got to go back and help people recognize that there is a stake. Right now, we're able to say and do, for the most part, as Americans, what we like. We have free speech, we have free access. And if we don't live in a democracy, we won't have that. You won't be able to go to from Dayton to Washington without a military post signing off on what happens to you. And so we need to explain to them what the alternative to democracy looks like and where they can be engaged and be a voice. At the foundation, we've begun to talk about the 3 C's that are critically important in this day and time. One is the courage to speak up and speak out about what is right. And democracy is nonpartisan. And we ought to be comfortable saying that it is nonpartisan. Number 2, we have to convene. We've got to do what we're doing here. We've got to talk about it. We've got to convene the everyday people in our community to talk about, well, what does it mean that we've got these killings happening in our community and we all agree that they're unacceptable? What do we do? The 3rd C is building coalitions. How do we all come together to find ways to address the problem collectively? In our research, it's called co-production from Elinor Ostrom. Others use terms like co-creation, but we've got to do it together. And that doing it together, that co-creation, that co-production, that is your power. And if you recognize and use that power, you will, in fact, not only change Dayton, but you will change the world.
It's an extraordinary vision. I'm going to we'll come back to that. I'm going to take us down a little bit from forest to trees. So, Vinay, inside Better Together America, you mentioned that some of the organizations that are inside do service, some of the organizations do depolarization kinds of work, some of them do problem solving. How much do you think that problem solving is central to a resilience hub or a civic hub or whatever you call it? Is problem solving an essential ingredient or is it an optional ingredient for citizens feeling like they belong and have a sense of agency?
I would say it's essential. And the reason it's essential is because, I mean, the theme that we've started to latch onto is power, right? Power to enact change. So unless we're actually solving a problem together, then we don't have that agency and we don't have that power. So I think I would say it's 100% required. Having said that, all the other activities that we're talking about, like service and bridge building that I'm directly involved in, are necessary precursors. They help with that problem solving. Like you can't effectively solve a problem together if people are screaming at each other. You can't effectively solve a problem together if people don't care about each other or haven't built relationships. So it all feeds in to the problem solving. But yet that is, for me, is the linchpin which makes this real, and which creates that power and that agency.
Does it strike you as challenging that so few activities in the bridge building world and the hub world and in our, what we would think of as opportunities to come together civically, that so few of them actually do direct problem solving? Is that a challenge, or is that just a natural evolution that our civic infrastructure needs to go through?
For me, it's a natural evolution. Like, I think it's, if the way we've thought about problem solving, in fact, the way we do nonprofit work is, hey, here's a problem, let's solve that direct problem. So, okay, polarization is a problem, how do we solve it? Let's bring people together. That makes sense, right? But what we've got to do is see the larger picture now and say, what does bridge building, what does it serve in terms of problem solving? How does problem solving rely on bridge building? How does service plug into that? So it takes time for us to see the larger picture, but I think we're at that point now. We've got to see how all these parts fit together and feed each other, right? And as I said, millions of people with shared values, not yet organized. Imagine the collective potential right there if we were organized.
Jillian, you're what I would think of as an ace civic professional, and I think of myself as a civic professional. I had this moment the other day where I was talking to I've taken on my first local work as co-chair of the Braver Angels Alliance in Southeast Pennsylvania. And I started talking to a local volunteer about best practices relating to an activity that she was doing. And she looked at me like I was a Martian. And I realized I'm not being very helpful here. So how does it feel? Do you feel like there's tension for you in, on the one hand, being a civic professional, and on the other hand, really needing to let citizens sort of grab the reins, where your ability to kind of control things the way that might be right is less in play? How do you manage that?
Yeah, that's such a good question. You might have heard of a term, now I'm forgetting where this comes from, whose book this comes from. It's referred to as the IKEA effect, which is that you place higher value on something when you build it yourself. Even if it is just particle board furniture, you're actually willing to pay slightly more for it if you put it together yourself because you were invested in it, you saw how it came together. And I think you see this in civic work and all kinds of work, that the brain has to sort of do its own work to become fully invested in something that you're spending time on. And it can be very, very frustrating when you're like, there's a whole set of best practices, like I have a flowchart, I have a presentation, do you just want, this could be so much faster. But it won't work, right? Because your brain needs to do its own work, and you have to create environments and containers where people can do that, and people can actually realize success, whatever that success looks like. Success begets more success. But yeah, I think it's like a lot of this work is a little unsexy and super inefficient sometimes. And that's fine, because what we see as inefficiency, I think, is actually building all of this other civic muscle that is really useful all over the place.
Thanks. I'll take some comfort from that. And I appreciate your taking off the second grade Girl Scout troop leader for that answer.
Oh, they're a mess.
So, but when you think that way, there's this saying that I've always latched onto, this idea that top down doesn't work and bottom up doesn't scale. And when I imagine what it looks like for one community after another to be making the same mistakes, to be reinventing the same circle, it feels like, is there any way to like take the IKEA effect and just push it down a bit so that more communities kind of know what they're doing and that they're still able to do it, but able to learn from each other, or able to have national systems that help them hold things in a way that doesn't leave them not doing as well as they can.
Yeah, 100%. So there are all of these tools and I think it's maybe about finding a balance. So there are all of these tools that can make these kinds of things more efficient. So Cortico is here. You can do sense making from a conversation with Cortico so much faster than if I record it and transcribe it and correct the transcription. So I think that there are things like that that can help speed up the process. Certainly being able to plug into a national network like Braver Angels, Civic Genius, which is now a program of the National Civic League, we were called Common Ground Solutions back in the day before we did a spunky rebrand. So there is a way, I think, to bring in kind of your most enthusiastic people who are looking for those best practices, who do kind of realize that there's a better way to do this, but they need to be people who really have trust in a community. I don't think you can airdrop the expertise, but there are people who can act as messengers of that expertise back to the relationships that they already have.
Thank you.
I'll go on and jump in. I saw you looking
Please.
at me. As a former member of the board of the National Civic League, one way to do that is through the All America Cities Awards. We recognize communities across the country that have found ways to bridge their differences and work on shared problems. And this year, 10 communities were recognized, and I think the number over the years that we've been doing this work, 70-some years, is about 500, 600 communities. And so people learn from each other much more than they will learn from professionals. One, because we don't talk the same way. You know, as a city manager, the hardest thing was to learn that the way I talk about problems is not the way everyday people either experience them, talk about them, or sense them. And so the language becomes an important thing to remember. But Roanoke learns from Petersburg and other cities. And so that's one way of doing that, and that can be scaled. That can be seen, that can be visualized. Those lessons that they learned in the communities that they talk about can be shared. Another way of thinking about that is through the research. And being able to tell the story of what happens, and then looking at our own community. You know, I live in Dayton, as you probably have guessed by now, but each of our neighborhoods is a little bit different. And so there's not a citywide solution to a particular problem. Mainly it's going to be driven by the communities, the neighborhoods that people live in, and the fabric of that neighborhood and the way people engage and live their problems. And so remembering that people name and frame problems, if they work together through deliberation to figure out what the options are, then they act together. It's the acting that builds trust. Institutions are transactional. We talk about metrics and dollars and impact. Everyday people talk about feelings, how I feel, what I think, what I see, what I believe, what I've experienced. And so to build trust, you've got to work together so that they can recognize and see what you bring to the table as a public institution, a foundation, and what they bring to the table, the lived experience, the history, the background, and the everyday work. That is required, because at the end of the day, everybody else is going to be gone, and the neighborhoods have to be the constant factor of continuing the learning, the growth and development of the work, and trusting them to be able to do that. And that's been the hardest part for institutions to give up trust. Place-based philanthropy is a way now of beginning to think about it, rather than the organization saying, here's a problem, now we'll pay you if you can figure out how to fix it. We're now saying, you've got problems in your community, you tell us what you need so that you can fix those problems yourself, and how then the rest of us can help you.
So, yeah.
Just jump in on that. That phrase you talk about, Roanoke learning from Petersburg. Like, let's think about that for a moment. It's at Better Together America and at a lot of the other national organizations we've spoken to, the vision we see is like a widespread national network of deep local nodes connected sideways, laterally, talking to each other, learning from each other. So it's a flat network is where we need to get to, where you've got leaders and communities seeking knowledge from each other, right? So how do we get there? It doesn't exist today. So how do we get there? The job of national organizations is to facilitate that network, right? So that means the empowerment within that city, but also connecting them to each other, right? Through whether it be through technology or expertise, right? It all has to be available for those who are seeking it, and also creating the conditions by which people are seeking it.
You mentioned philanthropy, right?
Yes.
As you started talking about place-based philanthropy, does it strike you that that funders, even when they're doing place-based philanthropy, tend to want to have systems that are professional, measured, not sloppy and messy, really good reporting, really good fiscal capabilities, that ends up supporting systems that are led by professionals where they're directing the citizens rather than letting the citizens have their own messy, less professional experience that actually has more stickiness. What's your experience?
Of course. I mean, we live in an environment where accountability, if you're particularly working in public, it's accountability. We are responsible for somebody else's money, whether it's a donor's dollar or whether it's the tax dollar. And so that sense of the business of the organization is to ensure economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. And that's great. But if I'm a community-based organization, loosely there may be 3 or 4 of us. Some of us may be part-time, not even all full-time. To impose that on them is, quite frankly, ridiculous. And so what we try to do, I happen to be on the Dayton Community Foundation board as well. What we try to do is, one, help people build capacity in the larger community. So we are a place-based initiative in a particular neighborhood where there are hundreds of people that are part of a broad network, and we've got some undergirding support of professionals. But everyday people come together in a room like this and say, what is the issue we want to deal with? Well, we need more small business. Well, what kind of small business do we? And they come up with the ideas and analyze and think about what to do, come up with a list of the things of we want to help teenagers who want to do a t-shirt business get started, and they might need $500 to do it. And so it's iterative, and people are talking about what they can do, and then we come in and say, well, we can help here. And oh, by the way, even the Kettering Foundation, when we do our contracts, we don't say, and you've got to show your accounting system, this and that. I simply ask for a work plan on what you're going to do and the results of what you did as you name and frame it. And I will give you half of the money in the beginning and half of the money at the end, or whatever reasonable relationship works. I could ask for their audits, their accounting, but that will be more than the work that they're expected to do. And so some of it is building trust. Some of it is being realistic about what you want people to do, and keeping the expertise where it belongs. We want people in the community working at the grassroots on those kinds of problems. We don't want them being an accountant. We pay a lot of accountants in our shop to then go and manage and see what happens. And so even governments are moving, particularly local government, in the direction of, we've got the infrastructure for the business part. We want you to do the work part, and we'll arrange the relationship so that we'll still have the responsibility to audit and make certain that the legalities are all met. But we want to do every we can to lift you up in the everyday work of how do you bring these kids together? How do you help them develop a business plan? How do they buy the t-shirts as a collective? How do they develop the draw? We want them to do that kind of work in community.
Thank you. So things go so fast. We're going to wrap ourselves within a couple of minutes and then I'll introduce Mari. But in a short time, address directly our colleagues, other civic professionals. What would you ask? What would you hope? In relation to this, in relation to thinking about how to be elevating citizens to solve challenges for themselves, what are some things that we can be thinking about for our activities? Vinay, why don't you start off?
The thing I would be asked, that I would hope would be top of mind moving forward is this, is that how do we pool our efforts for scale and depth, right? I've said this a couple of times now, there's a lot of us. There's a lot of us, but it feels like we're small because because the polls are organized, right? There's a lot more people who care about civility and civics, but they're much less organized. So how do we get there? How do we pool our efforts? How do we be more efficient? And so, the unspoken majority can actually find and assert their power. And I think it starts with us.
Yeah, I think what I'm most interested in through my work at Civic Genius and at the Civic League is connecting these kinds of things to government. So as we work on citizens' assemblies, for example. We're running 2 right now, one in Washington State. They haven't been announced.
We won't tell.
Now, this is live stream.
Breaking news. I think there's a kind of person, you're like professional citizen who's in the Rotary Club and they go to the town hall meetings and they read all their elected officials' newsletters. Those people are amazing. I want all of them. I want to work with all of them. And most people are very busy, right? And it's hard to put your attention on something that doesn't have some kind of tangible result. And that's not because you are lazy necessarily. It's because you're very busy and you want to spend your time well. So I think as we talk about all of this community level capacity for problem solving, turning that into an actual policy change and showing people that that is possible and that it was informed by people who look and sound like you, and then there was real accountability on the other side of that, I think that's how you build scale.
Thank you. We go a little bit short here.
Yeah, and I'm going to suggest that you get to know your community and you volunteer, that you go and do something in your community, whether you're organizing a movement, whether you're coordinating and corralling 2-year-olds or 7-year-olds, but know your community. And so when you're having these conversations, it's not you up here talking to people down there. It is you talking about what you do every day with your neighbors in your community. That's where you gain credibility, and that's where you're able to see how the work can be scaled collectively from your neighborhood to others within your city.
Thank you. Will you thank our panel? So we can depart. 7 weeks ago, Mari Giles, after over 30 years, I think, in the corporate sector, became the newly appointed CEO at Braver Angels. And as somebody here that knew Miles, Mari before I did, told me it's like jumping on a freight train. And boy, was he right. Mari, take it away.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to the National Conference on Citizenship for convening this. Thank you for gathering and focusing on building civic resilience. To me, this has been a vivid reminder of just how much creative energy is moving forward in this space to try to meet the moment. And thank you for David and to those of you who are on our panel for that discussion. What struck me most about these reflections is not only the opportunities, but also the honest acknowledgement of the challenges, the very real challenges of what this is. And I think a lot of people need to hear that, even while we're calling for more. Because gaining civic muscle in a time like this with so much pain and so much hatred is a challenge, and yet it is the only solution. Darkness never gets rid of darkness. Hate never gets rid of hate. Only light gets rid of darkness. Only love gets rid of hate. As Brave Angels' new CEO, I'm still adjusting. I think it's been 7 weeks. The last 5 days have been pretty intense. But to be honest, in starting with this, I felt like I was kind of handed the playbook on the shoulders of so many people working so much of here's how to heal America. But when I was on about a third of the way through, turned the page, and alone on that page, it was blank until it said, "You've got it from here." But that's my learning curve. I'll learn from all of you doing together. I've been a volunteer in this space, but now moving in full force is because this is a mission I feel called to, as I'm sure is consistent with many of you. It's a privilege to share a few words to kind of step back on this. And heaven knows we don't need another litany of statistics to prove that we're in a civic crisis. The events of the past week alone demonstrate the collapse of social trust and hatred that's present in many circles. We know these patterns: rising polarization, declining trust in institutions, mistrust of media, spread of misinformation, despair. And we're living the experience of accelerating political violence and the inability to have productive conflict. I'm from Utah. I live 25 miles from the campus of UVU. My wife and 4 of our kids have attended that university. Each year, it's where our community has our high school graduations. Last Wednesday, our nephew and his wife were at that Charlie Kirk event. My daughter's friend was seated in the front row, senior in high school. No matter your feeling about Charlie Kirk, his methods, his words, each of those people observed an assassination of a young father engaging in debate on a college campus. It does not matter the viewpoints he was sharing. It's the tragedy that was experienced, the memories that will not be forgotten. I have other nephews and nieces who attended the same school in southern Utah as Tyler Robinson, the accused shooter. They and their parents are trying to process how someone from their town could move from the online discussions of hatred sufficient to take the real-world steps to kill someone for their words. I think of the shooter's parents making the decision to help their son take the responsibility for his actions. I worry about the realities of the labeling associated with who this person was and what his beliefs were. But those actions are indicative of our crisis. We've allowed the narrative to be defined by conflict entrepreneurs, people who make money and gain power off of our division. To many Americans, our system feels distant, out of control, and most importantly, it's something that we have nothing to do with. But that's absolutely not true. We will not experience change until we take accountability for the reality in front of us. It only works for the industrial outrage complex when we participate in their scheme. As Americans, more than anywhere else in the world, we have the power to shape the society we desire to live in and that we desire to leave for our children. That's not just some nice kumbaya statement. It's real. It's true. It's worth remembering this isn't the first time America's lived through such fracture. At the turn of the 20th century, the nation was convulsed by the upheavals of industrialization, mass immigration, stark inequality. Political machines and corporate monopolies dominated public life. Racial terror was codified into law in the South. Leading writers and thinkers of their time, as well as everyday citizens, worried aloud that democracy was failing, that corruption and rancor had hollowed out the civic heart of our country. Does that sound familiar to what we feel today? And yet history reminds us that that low tide did not mark the end of the American experiment. In fact, it marked the beginning of a new wave of renewal. Ordinary citizens, not elites, not politicians, not professionals, they stepped forward to build new civic institutions. The civic infrastructure that we're talking about today. Settlement houses, Rotary, the Scouts, the NAACP, 4-H, the League of Women Voters, the United Way. All of these things that we now take for granted as institutions in the United States once began as a fragile, scattered experiment after that moment in time. Critics at the time dismissed it as too small to matter. But they multiplied, they scaled, and they became the civic infrastructure that carried us forward for a century. The lesson, fragility is not failure. In fact, fragility is the natural first stage of resilience. Let me return to Utah over the past few days. Within 2 hours of the assassination, a group of us, all Utahns, we gathered on a call. We'd become friends over the last 5 years through our work in the community. And we also happen to be leaders in 7 different national organizations that work in civic renewal, all living right there. We moved quickly. We crafted a message to our friends, families, and neighbors in Utah, working with many of our people in the army of people in each of our organizations. We crafted a message about the meaning of this moment and the imperative to act instead of react. Within 24 hours, we had a resource online that was built to share with people and to encourage them to turn toward each other at turntoward.us, and offering them access to resources, to tools, and upcoming events that they could experience to help consider what to do within their own sphere of influence. And within 48 hours of the shooting, we were at the Capitol building in Salt Lake with over 100 Utahns on a Friday afternoon, and the media releasing this resource and calling on citizens to take control of our own response as individuals, as families, as neighbors, as a state, as Americans. We presented simple, accessible, and effective resources for multiple organizations, but made them easy for people to find, not requiring that they go through our organization to get there. The morning of the event, our PR partners recommended you should postpone because they caught the shooter. The story's going to shift. We said, no, we can't. The story we know that Utahns need and the story that Americans need is the one that we're there to say. And we showed up, and people showed up. Not elected officials, just citizens, and a lot of them. Now, there's a long road still ahead for us in Utah, for us in the United States. Make no mistake, what we're doing today and everything we are about is about a countercultural movement. This is not what the dominant narrative is inviting us to do. But that's the spirit behind citizen-led solutions, to bridge the political divide in a way that cannot be ignored and cannot be overlooked. My good friend Manu Meal the other night, at a gathering we had with national organizations with 1,500 people, he said, this is a call to outrageously bridge build. We call it courageous citizenship. Braver Angels launched CLS this year, not as a departure from what we've done, but as a deepening of our mission. For nearly a decade, what we've done has been known for depolarization. Our work has touched thousands of lives and has proven that well-directed dialogue matters when driven by energetic volunteers that have good training. But depolarization, powerful as it is not enough. If dialogue ends at understanding, people walk away hopeful but still asking, now what? CLS represents a new emphasis for Braver Angels in two ways. First, we're infusing our depolarization activities with opportunities for citizen action. We want our training, our debates, our workshops, our discussions, not just to bridge divides, but also to spark collaboration, co-creation, integrating of ideas on shared local challenges. And second, we're doubling down on our strategy of building and equipping local alliances. We have 124 now. These are our chapters around the country. But we're equipping those to become epicenters of civic renewal, like the civic hubs that Vinay was just talking about, others have said. Alliances where Braver Angels members put dialogue into practice, and now where they will also put collaboration into action. Every Braver Angels activity is designed so that ordinary people, like teachers, parents, students, retirees, that can run them, not civic professionals. We've learned that when local citizens lead, the work has deeper legitimacy and greater power. If history rhymes, then there are two key lessons among many others that teach us. First, renewal begins locally, then multiplies nationally. Whole House started with one Chicago neighborhood. Rotary started with 4 friends. The NAACP started with a handful of organizers. Scale came later. And the second lesson, that resilience doesn't just come from structures, it comes from practice. As we've heard so many times of this idea of civic muscle. Like any muscle, civic muscle only grows by being used. We grow stronger in self-government not by leading through exercises designed by others, but by lifting the weight ourselves. Tackling problems together, improvising solutions, building trust rep by rep in the gym. Institutions can provide that gym, but people must do the training themselves. And so here we are today. We have a choice, in my mind. As Governor Cox said in our state, is this the end of a dark chapter or is this the beginning of a much darker one? I believe in the aftermath And even before this string of assassinations, that we're seeing signs, first signs, of another civic renaissance. We see them here today. This is our National Week of Citizenship in this country. 238 years ago tomorrow, the framers of the American experiment signed our Constitution. Next year, we celebrate 250 years. From that moment, it all started with the Declaration of Independence. Today is our moment to declare interdependence. It's a choice. It's our choice. Each American, each of us here today, everyone listening. None of these programs that we're all involved in are perfect. Many of the things we do look boutique, scattered, and fragile, and some funders or policymakers dismiss them in our time as being marginal. I've been asked many times in the last 4 days by reporters, is this a sign that this work does not work? I said, no, it's a sign that this is a time to live the things that we've been teaching, the things that we know to be true. But that's exactly what critics said about settlement houses, scout troops, League of Women Voters, and community chests in 1900. If we've learned anything from history, it's that fragility is not a reason to doubt, it's a reason to invest. Now let me address finally a reality many in this room grapple with. The roles of philanthropy, professionals, and institutions, they're indispensable. We can't do the work without all three. And yet too often, even with our best intentions, we default to models that place citizens at the margins. Citizens are asked to participate in programs designed elsewhere to engage with agendas crafted by experts or to provide input into initiatives they don't really own. This isn't because of malice, it's because citizen-led efforts often look messy, hard to measure, and difficult to scale. Professionalized organizations, by contrast, look predictable, manageable, fundable. We just heard the discussion of that, but history also tells us when citizens are at the margins, civic renewal stalls. When citizens are at the center, civic renewal spreads. The question is not how can institutions better lead people? The question is how can institutions better support people to lead themselves? Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, echoes from a later assassinated US president in his words in 1961. All of this rests on a deeper truth. American democracy has always been citizen-led. Our founding promise is that sovereignty resides with the people, from the Declaration of Independence to the Progressive Era to today's renewal. The through line is the same. Civic health is not handed down from above. It's generated by people themselves. And that health depends on more than laws and policies. It depends on culture. The 20th century civic renaissance worked not just because it built organizations, but because it built rituals and habits of belonging. Badges, service days, pledges, community halls gave people a sense of identity, agency, and shared purpose. Theodore Roosevelt put it plainly in 1899 when he said, the main source of national power and national greatness is found in the average citizenship of the nation. Local organization is what fascinated Alexis de Tocqueville about America in 1831. It's citizens who must lead. History calls them ordinary or average. At Braver Angels, we know they're both courageous and capable. So let me close with this call to action. If we're serious, I just left a 30-year career to jump into this because I believe this with all my heart. But if we're serious, like I believe we are, about building civic resilience, then our task is not simply designing better institutions, policies, or programs. Our task is to equip average Americans to trust each other and to lead together. Let us commit to making our work less about how institutions, professionals, and experts can better engage people, and more about how people engage with each other to lead their communities and together our democracy, our republic. That is what civic muscle means. It's not something institutions give to people. It's something citizens build by using it. Like Sarah from Oxford in one of our CLS case studies said about her community's efforts on affordable housing, we own what we make. And her neighbor Lynn offered this hope. If you're thinking you could do this in your community, you can. History tells us this is possible. The present tells us this is necessary. And the future will depend on whether we have the courage to trust our citizens and ourselves to lead. Thank you very much.